all of this, let's bring in Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. She's a retired LAPD sergeant and author of a new book called The Confidence Chronicles, the greatest crime story never told. And CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor, Ellie Honig. Great to see you both. Sergeant Dorsey, let's start with you. The suspect was also hit and died at the scene. A steel or metal cable lock was found near his body. No firearm was recovered. Do you find any fault with what the officers did here? Should the officer have fired the weapon?
I don't find any fault with what the officers did. They deployed tactically, they communicated continuously, and they gave the suspect an opportunity to surrender. They announced that they were coming up on the second floor, suggested that he make himself visible and surrender, and he did none of that. And while it's tragic that this young girl lost her life, there's no way to know that she was on the other side of that wall. We saw that for the most part, there weren't any patrons or customers up there on the second floor. And so let's not forget that there was a young woman who we saw just moments before being savagely beaten by this man with this chain with a lock on the end of it. And while it's not a gun, be clear, that's a deadly weapon. He could have easily killed her.
No question about it. And just as clear is the just heartbreaking tragedy of this young girl's death. Ellie, what's your reaction to Sergeant Dorsey saying there was no fault with the officers here? Is it possible even still that the officer could face criminal prosecution?
Well, John, prosecutors will, of course, have to do a complete investigation, but my initial instinct based on what we know so far is very similar to Sergeant Dorsey's. Of course, this is an unthinkable tragedy. The law in California says that a police officer is entitled to use lethal force to discharge his or her weapon if it's necessary to prevent imminent, meaning immediate, threat of death or great bodily injury. And I think the video image that we've seen shows that these police officers walked into the scene of a rampage. This individual, Mr. Lopez is his name, he was on a rampage. He was hitting people with a heavy metal object, which, as Sergeant Dorsey noted, can do real damage. They walked right past a bloodied woman. So it's a tragic situation. We have to get all the facts. But I do think that ultimately this shooting will be ruled a justified shooting by the police.
And what's that process for determining if the officers acted reasonably under the circumstances?
Yeah, so under the law, you have to look at what the officer reasonably knew at that moment. The law actually says you can't go back and use sort of perfect hindsight and say, well, for example, there was this person, this young woman behind the wall there. There's no way, based on the evidence we've seen, that the officers could have known that. Police and prosecutors have to get every bit of evidence here. They have to run the ballistics. They have to review every second of surveillance video, of body cam video. They have to interview everyone who was there, police officers, bystanders, get the complete picture, and then they'll make their legal conclusion.
Now, Sergeant Dorsey, put us in the police officer's shoes. This is a clothing store, open during shopping hours, middle of a busy holiday season. So what's the protocol when it comes to assessing that kind of environment and ensuring that others are not in the line of fire, understanding that there was no way to see the young girl and her mother behind that wall?
Well, we can hear the officers as they are on scene asking some of the people who are either exiting the store or working in the store, are there any customers upstairs? They knew he was on the second level. And so they're being observant as they're going up the escalator to that second level, and they're perusing their environment. They're looking left to right as they're walking, trying to locate the suspect. And you don't see anyone until they encounter the victim. And so what's in the mind of the officers in that moment? They're responding to a code 3 call. That means red lights and siren, shots fired, possibly an active shooter. That's what was in the mind of the officers. The suspect hitting this woman with that lock probably sounded to the witnesses like gunfire, and that's what the officers were responding to when they encountered the suspect. Now, I give you, there was some distance between them, but they did not have concealment. There was a clothing rack between the officers and the suspect. Had he been armed, as they were told and believed, he certainly could have done great damage to the officers, fatally wounding one of them had they not acted in the manner that they did.
So, Ellie, briefly, what's next in this investigation? What's the process?
Yeah, so state investigators will get involved now because there was a fatality. They'll do their findings. Look, they need to be transparent here. They need to be accurate, and they need to move quickly here. Ultimately, a prosecutor at the state AG's office and the local prosecutors will sit down and make a determination whether to put the case in front of a grand jury and whether to seek an indictment or not.
We'll see what goes forward, but thank you all for clarifying this tragic situation for us. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, Ellie Honig, thank you very much. Be well.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.